So, I think I was talking about last night. I saw the Sound of Music because the Fathom Events does these reissues, which is basically watching a DVD on a big screen. Sometimes there's a sing along, but it's basically a DVD on a big screen. You're paying $20 to see that, but nevertheless, at least you're getting to see a classic film on the big screen. Um, in my case, I was the only one in the audience.
That's
But
good.
um, but I stayed through Act One, where the intermission occurs. I wasn't sure they were going to show it because you had called the theater and said, even though it's showing in digital, are they going to have the intermission? And the guy told you on the phone that they weren't going to. So I was prepared to just leave after. Well, for those of you who've seen the movie, Julie Andrews does the little the dance with Christopher Walken. I mean, not Christopher Walken, Christopher Plummer, during the party sequence, and she's falling for him, and she gets scared, and then Eleanor Parker, who's the government, says, "Why don't you go back to the convent, and I'll take care of the family. I'll take care of you know." Mr. Von Trapp, sir, that kind of thing. And Julie Andrews starts packing up and she leaves, and then boom, intermission. And that's how I saw it the last time in 70 millimeter. It was a reissue in the 90s, but boom,
Wow.
intermission, and then followed by the interact, which is like a 2 minute overture. It's not so much for an overture, but it's sort of a 2 minute like rehash of some of the music that you see. Like if you see Sound of Music at the beginning, the overture, they're actually like playing the music that you're gonna hear, which is like 3 minutes, and it's touching upon the themes of all the songs they're gonna follow later on in the movie, like Tonight and Somewhere for West Side Story. So in the case of Sound of Music, like in the middle, I think it's just a rehash of like Do Re Mi or something like that. So, but anyway, I got to thinking that, and that intermission came in at the 102-minute mark of the movie. So, and then everybody knows like the second act of the movie, there's no singing, there's no music. I mean, there is, but it's it goes into serious territory with the subject matter. There the Von Trapp family is being forced to work for the Nazis, and the question is, how do we escape? What do they do? Um, you know, and so there's very little singing. In fact, it's a rehash of "So Long Farewell" at the concert scene. So, but anyhow, I got to thinking like intermissions. This idea of intermission. So 100 minutes in, and then let's say a 15-minute break where people went up, got to the bathroom, they bought some candy. They talked to their friends like, "Hey, yeah, what do you think about that lady? What do you think about that chick in the lead? What do you think about that guy? Playing the millionaire, the billionaire, with the millionaire in that case. They have good chemistry. They chat and lobby, and it was a time to kind of talk to your friends and catch up. Like, oh, don't forget that school meeting tomorrow, or don't forget Kyle's play next week, or don't forget band practice. And it's great to catch up with your friends. Now that whole experience is gone as we know it because they rarely have intermissions, and if they do, it's not to this extent. Because theaters said like if we have to take off 20 minutes times 4 times a day, that's 2 hours of screen time or showing time that we lose out on. So let's just try to pack this in and cut the intermissions out and have more shows a day. Which I think that argument is not relative anymore because you go to these theaters during the day and there's zero people. There's one person. So I mean, it's such a waste of consumption of electricity and fossil fuel to have like one person watch a movie and they don't kick them out, and you're blasting air conditioning in the whole building. And it's great that the one person wants to go at noon to see a movie. I encourage anybody who wants to go see a movie to go see it, but I don't know that I can condone or justify this waste. I mean, maybe there should be responsible movie going, like like in airlines, it'd be something like, well, if you're the only one that's in this audience and and you're being green responsible, why don't you just go to the theater next door that has two people, and we'll black out this we'll black out this screen. So instead of Sound of Music, you can go see what's out right now, K-pop, Demon Slayer or something.
Demon Slayer, anime
Yeah,
movie.
yeah, yeah, or something like that. So anyway, um I got to thinking like, these movies were carefully set up so that there was a firm, clean break at the intermission mark, so that like it was shot that way. It was preparing you for like sort of like a cliffhanger. Like cliffhangers would, there'd be a car chase, and then they're about to go over the mountain. You see a little model car go over the mountain. It's to be continued next week, next bat channel. And so intermissions were set up like that. So when things came so when movies arrived in our homes, it was a different situation because there's no intermission, obviously, because you're getting an intermission every 20 minutes. Well, in the old days, in the 60s and 70s, I think when they started first broadcasting network movies like The Sound of Music, and I think I don't know when the first airing was, but probably 70 something. There wasn't any intermission, so it was every 20 minutes you'll get commercials. You'll get national commercials, and then you get local, like film at 11. I'm not wearing any pants. Film at 11, that kind of thing. So, um, so it messes up the momentum of what the filmmaker's intention was. So, in other words, Sound of Music ends on that note, and then part two starts after 20 minutes. Now, here's where it gets complicated. Now, so they remove, obviously for television, they removed the intermission, right? So I don't know, because I don't recall the airings on NBC. I know that they had to cut 40 minutes out of one of the airings on NBC, like in the early 80s. So I Have Confidence was deleted, most of the song. The procession with the nuns was completely cut out. And I don't know how they handled the intermission. I think they basically probably she just leaves the house, fanfare, and they say, "What happened to Maria?" Or little kids, moping about. So, but anyway, so they cut it out for TV, but then for home video, to fit a 3-hour movie, it had to be on two tapes, right? Because the longest videotape that existed at that time, or generally speaking, the most practical length was 2 hours. They call them T120. Um, and so Sound of Music was 170 minutes. So there are 50 something, and you never wanted to make it a full 120 minutes because, like a movie reel, the beginnings and the ends of the tape are where you rewind it, and that's generally the place like where your tape would snap. Do you ever have those rewinder machines where you put the tape in, it goes zzz, and it fast because nobody wanted to wait. Nobody wanted to wait 5 minutes in their regular RCA deck, so they had these cheap machines doing zzz, and typically they would break at the beginning and ends of each tape. So you never wanted to fill a tape full of 2 hours or 120 minutes of stuff, because basically you knew at some point the beginning and end, maybe a minute, 2 minutes each on each side, you're going to get crap, dust particles that would mess up the image. So Sound of Music, um as I recall on tape, does not have the intermission, yet it has two tapes and it divides itself up. I believe tape one does not end where the actual intermission was. I'm pretty sure it's not. I think she leaves that house, the mansion. It goes into another scene. And then just all of a sudden, like when they ran out of tape at 120 minutes, they said, "Well, this is a good scene to edit on. Now let's start tape two." So totally different. It interrupts the flow. You know, um, we sort of, our laziness has kind of caught up to us, or actually it's not caught up to us, it's gone beyond control. But there's always been inherent laziness when it comes to entertainment. We want things handed to us, as easily as possible. We want movies that we can digest easily as possible. We want candy that tastes good, without something that's new, that we don't want. So but anyway, but so the two tapes, so at that,
Yeah,
so like I was saying, where our laziness is taking control of us. Whereas the idea of even taking a tape, taking what tape A out and putting tape B in, was such a burden that a lot of times people never even got beyond that to tape two, unless it was like The Godfather. And which another way, I think The Godfather, that's another thing. The Godfather, the VHS version, the early one. I'm forgetting if the first release where it comes, but the version that came out like around 1991, no, actually earlier than that, 80, like 86. The intermission couldn't have been any worse. The split of the tape of tape one ends right when Sonny gets shot. He gets assassinated, Sorry, spoilers, sorry guys. And then tape two starts literally when Tom Hagen drives up and sees the dead Sonny Corleone, and that's how tape two opens up, which makes no sense, other than the fact that they said, "Oh well, we're almost at 120 minutes. Yeah, let's just stop the tape here, and we'll continue on the next tape." So really, really annoying. And I guess my point is that it sort of upends the momentum of a movie, because first of all, you're watching a movie on tape, let's say for 100 minutes. You're gonna stop it, you're gonna go up to the bathroom, go eat something. Maybe if you're not tired, you'll put on tape two, but you don't want to rewind tape one, and you got to return it. Remember rental stores, you had to go return the tapes, and they had to be kind rewind, and
Right.
it took a long time to rewind tapes unless you had the cheap ones, which went zzz, but then they would like pull off the tape because they were so violent they would rip the tape out because the actual magnetic tape inside the shell was just a piece of splicing tape that just kind of went over it. It was like 3M tape, magnetic tape, and so they would go zzz, and they would just sort of split up that thing. So the question is something. My feeling is, I think most people never even got to tape two on a lot of these movies. Now I want you to think about some other movies that had two tapes. So I've given you Sound of Music. We know Ben Hur. I think Ben Hur. I want to say Ben Hur. I want to say that Ben Hur goes beyond. I don't remember. Do you remember where the intermission comes in on that, on Ben Hur, or like
I
Lawrence of
thought
Arabia?
I thought that I saw the. I just seen scenes from Ben-Hur. I didn't
Okay,
even
well,
see the
so give me an idea of another movie that had two tapes, and I'll tell you what
Ten
I'm.
Commandments.
Thank you, had two tapes. That did. I think that honored the actual intermission of the film. Um, so I guess what I'm getting at is that people became lazy, and they didn't, they didn't want to switch tapes, so they're essentially missing, the last third of a movie. I think the studios knew this, and they realized, okay, people aren't going to get to tape two, so let's just pack in tape one with as much of the movie as possible. You know, get all the great moments in, because tape two, is going to be. It's like the sequel thing, when like sequels, like the original gets the most views, but then the sequel gets watered down, and the attention and the views is far less than number one. And it's like that even when I do like these podcasts, and I'll label one, episode two. Like two doesn't get anywhere near the views like episode one would be if it was a two-part podcast, that kind of thing. So my feeling is that most people never even got to that second tape. And if you can keep thinking of other ideas like that, maybe non-classic, so, which leads to my next discussion, which is what they tried to do then. Um, as tapes became more of a sell-through commodity as opposed to rental, in others like rental, you'd have to buy the tape for $99 or $89. They give you wholesale, so $45, but you're still spending $45 for a tape without knowing or guaranteeing how many times it's going to rent over. And at that time, rentals were what, 299, 399. So there's no guarantee how many times it's going to rent over. And you've got to keep the store stocked with enough new releases and enough to please the rest of the audience, like the indie movies, the cult movies. And that's why you mostly saw certain stores like I think like Warehouse was focusing mainly on mainstream stuff. They had a little mailer, and they'd always print out the new releases, which was predominantly studio movies. But they did, kudos to them, they did carry a bit of cult movies, maybe one copy. But that's the fact that it's such an erratic, speculative business like that, and the fact that stores survived video stores survived for the better part of like 30 years is pretty, it's pretty incredible. Now there wasn't any streaming, of course. Cable TV was expensive. Other subscription TVs like On TV and Z Channel were expensive as well. So people had to go in the end rent. It was cheaper to rent stuff for the night, get three movies, or get them for the weekend. But you had to go return them, rewind them, and most of the time, people would never even end up watching the whole movie on a 2-hour tape. They just kind of just turn it off, and then pretty soon 48 hours goes by, and then you're like, okay, we got to return it. But tapes worked as pacifiers for young kids. They would. That's why the kids stuff, like especially the Disney stuff, there would be high attrition rates because those tapes would always break. Because you'd have kids handling it with food, and the tapes would always break, and so Lord knows what the Disney stuff looked like after it'd been rented. Although Disney, presented itself as this sell-through label, even though some movies like Tron came out as rental, but they really wanted like Mickey Mouse to be purchased. They wanted Snow White to be purchased and Pinocchio. They didn't want these rented. So I can just I can imagine amongst the sell-through audience how many torn tapes and damaged tapes you know became of that, the wear and tear. So, but anyway, my point is that once things became in the industry, once we were headed towards more of a sell-through type of market, then the studios could take a little bit more chances and be faithful to movies, and that's when you saw some of these, the first of the 3-hour tapes coming out. Uh, I'm trying to remember some of them, but do you remember like, for example, like, well, actually, Dances with Wolves. They put it out as a dual. I think it was originally a dual. No, no, I'm wrong. They first put it out as a single tape 3-hour edition because the movie's 2 hours and 40 minutes. So they had one tape, but then the shell stays the same, the dimension of the shell. So you've got to somehow fit more tape in the shell to get 3 hours, out of that shell that was basically invented for 2 hours for T120. And so what they came up with was the E160, with the 160 we go. So but the problem is to get that, and BASF, the German magnetic tape company, had experimented with these 2-hour tapes, and what they did was they basically printed thinner magnetic tape, so that you could fit 1/3 more of the recording time on this. The problem is that the tape was extremely thin, and it was likely to it was likely to shed particles faster than other words. And once you start shedding particles, then you have image dropouts, tape dropouts, all that stuff. So what happened was it was sort of disastrous for Dances with Wolves, is that a lot of people were complaining that they'd rent it as as one tape, 3-hour tape, and it would just like rip to shreds, or it would jam the machine. There would be lines back and forth, and so forth. And so I forget who put it out. It was Orion. Orion was partnered with Fox. I don't remember, but it was an Orion release, and I want to say that Fox somehow put out the VHS. But then what they quickly did was then they said, okay, well, we're just going to put it out as a two tape. We're going to put it as a two tape release, and that's for the most part how you saw it. And then becomes more going, then the path that follows for sell through kept emerging. So like at some point, they think I think the Columbia Library, yeah, actually, it's TriStar Columbia. I think they started sublicensing their movies out to like Good Times Video and Video Treasures, which became these were the precursors to like Anchor Bay, and I forget the other company. Um, but anyway, and then they started experimenting with the cheap. They were putting like Dances with Wolves on a on a 90-minute tape and printing it at SLP or EP speed, which was even it was a slower. The more revolutions per second you have of tape, the better the sound quality. That's why when you recorded sound on set, they would say, "Do you want 6 inches?" You know, uh 6 inches per second, or do you want 12 inches per, and the more inches per second, the better the quality was. So when you took these tapes that were 45 minutes, and you're basically going to EP speed, which is double if not trip, slowing it down by triple, then the picture, you're really losing picture quality, and you're losing a bit of audio quality, but you're really losing picture quality. And I remember there were issues that you couldn't scan because it was hard to scan on an EP mode tape versus like an SP mode, which was the standard play. Um, the what was the middle mode called? It was
LP.
LP. Yeah, LP wasn't used that much because that wasn't compatible with a lot of places, and the magnetic heads, depending on the machine, couldn't read it, and you certainly couldn't scan with LP. So what you saw was mostly SP or EP, but predominantly EP mode tapes later on, uh, because they were cheaper to ship. So it was one third the weight. So at that time when they were shipping like 10,000 copies of Airport 74 to Target, which is 2 hour movie, but it's on like a 40-minute tape. Um, and you're selling it for $12 at Target, getting 6 wholesale. Uh, then the quality suffers. The quality suffers. I remember in Close Encounters was on an EP tape. And I mean, I think Spielberg was like, "Oh my gosh, you just can't release movies like that." Like, people notice the quality. First of all, VHS wasn't the superior format anyway. It was Betamax. Betamax had more lines of resolution. VHS just made it practical because it wasn't proprietary. So anybody could make VHS deck machines like you could. You could have your own Warren VCR that's VHS, but you couldn't have a Warren Beta deck because you'd have to license it from Sony. Ironically, now now, well, it's not new, but obviously the recent war, Sony won out this time with Blu-ray versus HD DVD, which was Panasonic, which didn't quite click. Although the technologies are very, very close, and we're still far away from enjoying what I consider realistic 4K images at home. Everybody says, "Oh, 4K, 4K," and they don't realize that they're dial-ups and the buffering, the platforms, the amount of traffic. Most people think, "Oh, 4K, 4K," and you're not really getting that. I would say half the time, if not more, you're getting a 720p image on your 4K screen. It's nuts, and everyone's just spending like because they want 4K. Great, good luck. So I think 4K is even stronger. 4K has more lines than even like a 35 millimeter print, So, um, but anyway, yeah. So what do you have to comment on that subject?
Interesting you talked about 4K. Yeah, I guess it's not how I thought it be, made it sound like, because a lot of people are spending lots of money for 4K TV, things like that. So it's good of you to say that, to say, but yeah, but how it really is, with the resolution of pictures, it's
But no, but
good for
what about
people
the
to
three?
know.
But what about the 3 hour tape subject? You didn't
The
encounter
3 hour
any of
tape.
that?
I don't remember like renting. I know it was, what about the Titanic VHS? I
Yeah,
didn't rent
yeah,
that,
I,
but I
yeah,
remember that was available.
yeah, I think you're right. I think Titanic was one that they did 2 tapes because they learned from. Well, first of all, you couldn't put Titanic onto one tape because it's more than 3 hours, so it definitely was 2 tapes for that when it came out. But at that time, it was a time when I was 90. Titanic was what, 90? I don't know,
1997.
97. Yeah, and I wouldn't say VHS was totally out, but VHS was going out, so Titanic was more of a sell-through tape. We're in that era where Top Gun goes to sell through like almost straight to sell through at 27.99, and then they're debuting other sell through stuff like Godfather, Casablanca, Gone with the Wind. All that stuff went to sell through, and it was expensive for now. But when you consider at the time that the average tape was going for $89 or $99, and these sell through tapes at Costco for like $29 and $34. Pretty it's still pretty amazing what kind of number that was, but we were, I don't know what you spend on entertainment per month between your streaming and your individual transactional stuff, your newspapers, all your methods of entertainment. I know what you're spending, but I mean, it wasn't far-fetched to go to Costco and buy 5, 6 VHS tapes, and they'd be $200, or 100. That wasn't out of the ordinary, and that carried on through DVD. I mean, especially when DVD machines came out, Best Buy was so smart in saying, "Hey, here's your deck. There's your DVD deck. It's 150 bucks. And by the way, we have 2,000 DVDs in the store, and take your pick, and you'd see people with a deck and like 30 DVDs. And of course, DVDs were cheaper, so to speak, at that time. Like 14.99, 19.99. The stuff priced for rental was like 29.95 or 24. But you go to Best Buy and like, yeah, people just stack up. I remember like stacking up. Like I'd get like a dozen movies. I'd say, oh my gosh, because Anchor Bay had the skew, because Anchor Bay came from I know there's gonna be people correcting me on this, because I these are the facts I don't get along. I don't get down correctly, but I know that Anchor Bay, so to get DVDs and VHS tapes in the stores, you had to own what are called SKU placements. What a SKU placement is that they give you a barcode number. So in other words, you're Anchor Bay, and they say, okay, we're giving you 200 SKUs, which means you have 200 slots that you have to keep filled with product, and so they started doing VHS, and they had these 200 SKUs, if not more. Then they might have like 500 SKUs, honestly. And so as VHS died off, then that gradually progressed to DVD. And so Anchor Bay and these other people who own the SKUs were like, well, we're gonna, we have to make use of the real estate that we own, that we've paid for. So we've got to fill this stuff up. Uh, you know, uh, or else the SKUs aren't working for themselves. So that's how you saw like so much like anchor-based stuff flood the market into Best Buy. Not so much Walmart and Target, maybe later on, but like you had 6 Werner Herzog movies, you had 4 Argento titles, you had you had everything. You had all the Hammer stuff. You had some Shaw stuff. The Anchor Bay catalog. That's my point. So they were there to fulfill these SKUs, and so like the suppliers like Anchor Bay couldn't get, like they couldn't get, well, ultimately they did get studio movies, but what I mean, they had to find counter programming, because there were people like you and me who bought the DVD player, and they would say, okay, well, how do we how do I see Inferno? How do I where can I see Inferno? Or how do I even see Rear Window? And I don't know how many SKUs Universal owns, but they own that automatically, because they have the premier SKUs in the slots for studio movies. So the front base, some of those bases are expensive just to be featured on the slot in the front display. I mean, that could easily cost you 50, $60,000 minimum per store, just to, but the numbers were there. The sell-through rate was good. That's why they call it sell-through. And there weren't a lot of returns. I mean, the returns, it wasn't people hating the movie. It was just the stuff wasn't coming off the shelf. So that's why the smaller stores like Tower Records and Fry's, they could afford to keep stuff on their racks for a year, 2 years, hoping that somebody would be interested in it down the road. Whereas like Best Buy and Target, they had to, completely go in and out of of the product, so forth. Yeah, yeah. So these SKUs, and so they had to, if they had 200 SKUs or so, they had to ship them in and out. So the risk wasn't on the distributor necessarily. When I say distributors, these are people who owned, they're called rack jobbers, and they own these certain slots, and they would get you in. But the burden and the financial danger was on us, because then they would say, okay, well, here's this order for 20,000 copies into Best Buy or to Walmart. And so we'd have to make the 20,000 copies. And we were always going through other companies. We couldn't do it on our own, because just the cash flow to front for like 100,000 copies of all your releases, it's just not possible. So we'd have to go through the existing distributors, and then they would charge us like buck 25 per copy, plus packaging, plus authoring. They jack everything up, so we'd pay $1.25, and they were really secretly only paying for 50 cents from like Sony, from the supplier, or whoever was making the discs, and then marking it up for us. So they were making money and profit. Um, but the risk was on us, because they would stock, let's say, 10,000 copies of this movie, and we say, oh, that's great, gosh. So like, and they're getting like $9 a copy, or $10, and the distributor's taking a commission of 25% or something, or 27. So okay, this is good. We're in profit. But don't count your chickens before they hatch. And what literally killed the majority of DVD distributors was this old archaic system of how retail worked. So what happened was is they would ship the product, and then it wasn't, if it didn't prove itself in the first 2 days or 3 days, Walmart would get confused and they'd say, well, forget it, let's start sending it back. So again, it wasn't any risk on Walmart either. And on top of that, Walmart would charge us to place it. They would say like, we could sell you this slot for $5,000 for like a month or whatever, and we're going to charge you an extra 25 cents per copy, just for handling. So they were constantly, making money on that. And then what would happen was like it wouldn't sell. Like typically you put a movie into like Best Buy, and then 9 months later it'd say, okay, well, 20% of them came back. So we're just gonna, we're gonna deduct that from you. Um, what became scary around like 2016, 2017 is that they would say, okay, well, we shipped out 10,000 copies and 9,000 copies came back. And then we'd be, oh my God. And like we had to pay, we had to play Blu-ray authoring was expensive because you had a license from Sony, the key. So like Blu-ray authoring was like 2,000. Blu-ray manufacturing had to go through a Sony carrier, so that came out to about $1.50, $2 a copy plus printing of the sleeves. Um, a lot of these stores also, they wouldn't just take it from any duplicator because they had problems in the past where these cheap duplicators would accidentally ship out porn. And I mean, the disc would have like Werner Herzog on it, but it would be secretly porn accidentally because they had the wrong shipment. You know what I mean? Um, or it'd be some other movie, and then you'd have to do a recall, which is a total nightmare. I mean, and you wouldn't even know how many of the discs were effective. So if they shipped 10,000 discs, you wouldn't know if 1,000 had the Mexican movie. That actually is a true story. We had shipped stuff into Best Buy, and and then buyers were complaining that it was a Mexican movie and not the Kung Fu movie on it. So that was a nightmare. So Best Buy was like, well, we don't want to, we don't trust it. It's too dangerous. There's too much risk on our side. So we won't, we want you to go through this company who's approved by us. And so we had to pay these expensive prices to make discs without knowing that they're going to sell. And it's not like there was like, we had a say in it. They would say, oh, Walmart took 50,000 copies. Like we wouldn't have a say. We'd say, like, I personally would have said no. I would say, look, there's no way this movie's going to sell that much. Give them half of that, and it's still a risk. Give them half. So there was just this grasp and constant grasp to show positive cash flow, because you can see what's happening is with these 200 slots. Let's say these 200 slots, I don't know what they're worth, honestly. Let's just say they're worth like 10 mil, 15 million, right? I don't know. Let's say they're I mean, maybe I'm off on numbers. We'll figure that on a mathematical episode, but let's just say it's worth like 15 million, right? So so and some of those titles, it's like the streaming services, like if you don't replenish those slots every month, then your cash flow goes down. And so what happened was is that DVD players were declining in purchase, and the software, namely the discs, was declining at the same time, and all of this was going down. And so the distributors were showing negative balances. And these companies, like, we're very small, but we were under their mercy, right? But these other companies were, I mean, they were 20, 30, 35, 40, $50 million companies easily, easily. So they had a lot more financial risk. And let's say that this is worth 15 mil, and then they're losing like a third of that in business by not filling up the SKUs, and that looks really bad on your spreadsheet. So you have to fill it up. And so who's unassuming, but these small little companies like us that could fill the gap. Like they figured like, okay, here's 3,000, 4,000, we'll fill up, we'll fill up the slot. But it was a Band-Aid that came at the wrong time and for the wrong reasons, and it literally just put so many people out of business. And we struggled the really tumultuous waves going on. Like I just remember at some point it was announced that Target and Walmart, they said like, we're just not doing this, we're not, we're not selling, we're reducing our real estate space. We're gonna fill it up with more games. Games are selling, but no one's buying movies, so we're gonna drop off. We're gonna cut this space in half. So what they did is that they shipped everything back that they couldn't sell. And let's say for example, we were in a positive cash flow, and then all of a sudden 1 year later, here comes this debit from like Best Buy saying we've returned $50,000 of product to it, and we're like, no, I'm just gonna which lake shall I jump into, uh so that's what was going on. And there was no way to do there's no way to do an accurate accounting, because somebody would buy a DVD with just the nature of the way DVDs were handled for sales and stuff. There was a middleman, there was another middleman, there was another middleman, there was this middleman. There was this guy, but he gets a rebate back. There's this store gets a rebate. So it was really hard to see what the final net of a unit was, because like I said, okay, maybe at base price 24.98, you're getting 50%, so 12.98, and then the distributor gets a commission, let's say 25, 20%. So you're at like 9 grand, right? I mean, that's sorry, not $9 a unit. And out of that, then they say, okay, well, Target will carry it if you give them $2 per copy sold. So now we're already at $7, right? And the authoring and the printing of the sleeve, let's just say, came out to $1.50, $2. So we're at like $5 now. Okay. And the standard contract of the time was that the filmmaker gets 25% of that no matter what. So if it was $5 or $6, the filmmaker is going to get like 150, $2 no matter what. The problem is if there was a situation where a movie started performing, and then we had paid the filmmaker the profits out of that number here, but then a year later, Walmart and Target says, oh, by the way, we were sitting on this stash of like 1,000 copies of this movie that didn't sell. Here, we're deducting 9 grand from you. And it's just you can't retroactively go back and say, hey, to the filmmaker, we know, we paid you this much, but now we're at a deficit because all this stuff came back to us, this product, this commodity. Are you going to give us, or can you give us a payment back? Then obviously that's absurd. That's absurd. So a lot of the companies really didn't survive, uh that battle of the physical wars, because of the way it was, and the way it is structured. And like somebody, I'm not saying that this was widespread, but it was wide enough that I noticed it. Like, for example, somebody would buy some DVD, right? I don't know what it was, and they'd buy it at, let's say, Walmart or whatever, and then they would return it at another store that was selling it for another price. So, and technically you shouldn't be able to do that, but now, I mean, now with our UPC system, barcode system, the way it is, you can't. But typically they were doing that, and then trading for a higher amount. Or there'd be shenanigans like they would secretly tear out the DVD, make a copy, put it back in, shrink wrap it, and then say it's a return, and then we'd have to, there was a no questions asked kind of thing. So we'd have to return the whole price of 12, 13, $14 to the wholesaler. So there were certainly shenanigans like that wasn't enough. But then there was the stuff like, how do you calculate quantifiably, like, if you're paying Barnes and Noble $2,000 for their cabinet, their end cap and like, okay, see these movies about the wilderness, and you're carrying 3 movies there, and you're paying 2,000, 3,000 for that placement, that real estate. Like, how do you, how do you quantifiably calculate what the DVD is selling for? You know what I mean? Especially when it's spread across like multiple movies. Do you prorate it across each movie? But is that fair? Because maybe one movie sells a lot more as a wilderness movie than this one. So that was a lot of the issues, and it was just I honestly don't know how anybody could get through such a nightmare. And like in 2019, 2020, like the studios just quickly started dumping product because there were like middlemen that went bankrupt. A lot of these companies that handled like thousands of stores, they went bankrupt, and they started dumping DVDs to like the dollar store and the Dollar Tree for like 10 cents and 25 cents, and then they'd retail for 99 cents. And a lot of that was never just it was just considered junk fees, and they collected the money. But there was obviously no way to track that. And nobody brought that up either. They was just assumed it was junk, but technically it was income for a movie. But like, I mean, it was such a Wild West. Uh, you know, so much so that now, I mean, now there is a Wild West for streaming, which I'll get into on at some point another show. But like, the DVD really turned me off of the process, because the idea was like, okay, well, I know this movie got returned, and they returned these many copies, but this new chain opened up. Let's at least try to open up business with them and try to bring up some numbers back. Or this store opened up, or played theatrically in a few theaters, which helped at that time. So now we can do this, or maybe we'll get some cable deal out of this now, because it's done these, it has this presence on DVD. But yeah, sorry, I had a connection problem. Um, yeah, I mean, so it was very, very difficult on the accounting on that. Like for example, let's say you spent 2,000 on a display case for 4 titles, and let's assume that all 4 movies never sold, right? So do you deduct against those movies that they didn't make a dime? Like, do you do that? Because technically it was sort of advertising. It was, placement. It wasn't officially called advertising, but it was placement. That was still money was changing hands to the stores, to Barnes and Noble. And that's basically how I was kidding with somebody around that time. I was saying, no kidding. This is really not about the movie DVD business. This is about real estate. Because every month they know that they can get, 100 grand, 200 grand worth of real estate rent for each Barnes and Noble store every month. You know what I mean? Um, and that's sort of what kept them business, kept them in business, but it was having the steady flow of product. And then when the distributors just started seeing returns, and they started seeing that this wasn't economically viable, and we were getting into very dangerous terrain, they started pulling back on these expensive end caps. When there's always money to go around, then you see people sort of, I'm not saying lavish, but you see people doing the structure of the machine works. Then you're seeing money flow back from the consumer to the distributor, then it flows back into the market in terms of like, being able to expand, to produce more movies. Um, but then when there's no money, then it's just sort of, then everyone's acting out of desperation and survivalhood. And it was just scrambling, because there was like, what's public record doing, but I mean, I think the Alchemy was this distributor into Walmart. They owned, I don't know how many SKUs at Walmart, but they owned a lot. Um, and I think that they could clearly see what was coming down the pike, that the numbers of units, playing units were dropping, and the economy was dropping, which meant that the leisure money being spent was just kind of going out. So in other words, like, instead of going to Disneyland and buying 2 TVs and 2 players and 30 DVDs, it was just let's just go to Disneyland. And so I think they saw that coming down the pike, and a company that large, boy, when you see a dent like that hit, you're in dire straits. And I think their bankruptcy was like 30 or $40 million, which I believe, because you could see a lot of that product, and there was no warning. It was just like we woke up one morning and Walmart said, okay, well, we're not, we're cutting these shelves, we're cutting these spaces. Instead of keeping a movie out of the shelf for a year, we're now going to keep them out for 2 months. and if it doesn't sell, goodbye, it goes back to. And they're like, thank you for telling this, because we had no way of implementing a plan for Walmart. And now here we are, now we know it's going to Walmart next week, and we have no plan lined up. How is it expected to sell off the top? And why are you picking this movie? Because this movie will never sell. Of all places, it was my movie, Samurai Cop 2. I'm saying, I was telling him, don't sell it. Because I knew what would happen. And they were like, "Wait, can you just do this? We're, we'll drop the number of units so it lowers your risk." So, but I think it was something like dropping it from 50,000 discs to 20,000. I was like, "This is still." It was like, I don't feel good about this, because it was a double disc, and so it was like 253 bucks per unit, right? Plus the printing, plus the authoring, yada yada yada. So it already put uh my financial exposure at 60,000 plus, not to mention what the movie cost, which was 250 minus the 250,000 minus the Kickstarter. Let's say it was like 60. So I mean, it was, and then the rest. So I mean, it was a good 100,000, 125,000 my own cash, plus the rest was in loans and then the Kickstarter money. So I was in over I mean, that movie was just in over my in from the moment it started. And I know historically it's one thing, it's great, and I'm not regretting it, but it just came at the time when everything was going down. Now, had that DVD market still been solid, even with the bad movie that it is, it still would have sold a lot more. But I remember them telling me, like, they were like, "Dude, it's this is like nationally, by national numbers. Like, I don't, like I said, of the thousands and thousands of copies, and they told me nationally it sold 200 copies that week." I was like, "Okay, that's it. It's done. It's done." Because that's its debut week, and even if it were to increase and plateau, let's say to 500 copies a week, you never, there's not enough time that it's gonna make it enough of its money back before it gets dumped in 2 months, because X horror film is selling off the shelf, and you know, X horror film is making, 10,000 a week at per store. So I'm sort of glad that part of the business is gone. It was a very disturbing side of the business. There was a lot of excess, and one episode is not enough going into it. I'll go into it, but I mean, they were basically like, it's sort of a microcosm of what's going on in the larger picture of movies, where no one is actually making money off the commodity itself. It's just all these peripheral things that they're making money on, like, the guy who's authoring the DVD, the guy making the discs, the guy who's selling the shelf at Walmart and Best Buy, you know um the people making the magazines that every store gets, because every store would get these mailers, and they would run our ads for like 2,000 per page, 1,500 per page. They're making money, but it's all peripheral. And that represents sort of a microcosm of what's happening on the larger situation. And then predominantly from the moment the American film market started, um, it was a form of financing, because it enabled partners to get together and say, "Hey, how much do you have, Mr. Germany? Do you have 1 million? How much do you have, Mr. Japan? Do you have 500,000? How much do you have, Mr. France? Do you have 500,000?" And collectively, you would have, like, let's say 2 or 3 million in pre-sales, and then you'd go to, like, there wasn't Lionsgate at the time, but whoever, let's say Vestron, not even Vestron, but what could you put on? Because I've got this movie with Sean Young or whatever. Could you give me $500,000? And so then you'd have, like, and then plus interest, because nobody would just say, here's 1 million, go make a movie. No one's going to do that. So then you'd have to kind of raise money off of the contracts, the $3 million. And then that interest was high, because everybody knows that from the moment you take $1 and you're making a movie, there is no return unless you're extremely lucky and you're streamlined. There's no dollar coming back for at least 18 months, if not 24 months minimum. Now with streaming, you could literally go like this and then make a buck tomorrow. Totally different dynamic paradigm that all go into. But at that time, it was different. So they could make these sort of $3 million movies. I mean, some of them like I don't want to say like the Canon guys, but people of that vintage would put it in their pocket and then like they make it for 2 million. But what I'm getting at is that I'm almost with the feeling that 100% really okay 99 point something um yeah, what was I saying? So basically they're making like these $2 or $3 million movies, and I can assure you that that movie did not do it 2 or 3 million. Like if the majority of people tell you that they're making money on this business, they're lying. It's various different forms. Like for example, like Australia would make a movie for like 6 million, and they'd sell it for the Australian market, but then they'd sell it for other countries like United States, Germany, France, Italy, Spain. And then what the government would do, they through their export laws and their export what do you call it, the benefits and so forth, and the incentives, they would say, oh, okay, so who sold the rights to this Australian movie to America? Oh, okay, so you company, you sold that. We'll give you 100,000 because you successfully exported the movie to the United States. And then they would do this on and on, like, okay, did somebody go to Japan, France, Germany, and so it was all governmental money. So, but whereas the commodity itself wasn't really making money for itself. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So even in today's game, people like to be self-deluded and they say, "Oh, I spent $150,000, and it's made 150." But I mean, you know, maybe that's a possibility because there's not the extra overhead of doing DVD releases and theatricals are extremely cheap to do these days, but no one's doing it. I mean, really, you got to look deep and hard and calculate how much in interest have you paid? Did you pay yourself a reasonable wage, or what are you worth? You know, what's the split? What's all of that? And I can assure you the majority aren't doing it. They're just doing enough to make the next movie, which is what we do too. We simply just, we hope and pray that we can get a movie out there against all odds, all speculative now because there's no security on the back end now with ancillaries. And we just pray that we could make enough so we could go into making the next round of movies. But it's very, very hard as the money keeps shrinking and algorithms start suppressing our kind of movies, and well, indie movies for that matter, they really suppress them, and you've got to really do these huge numbers, and they'd rather be making money off of reality stuff that's pulling in a great TikTok crowd than our stuff. And it's um
Right.
it's really, really hard. And so our budgets have shrunken to nearly non-existent than what they were 15 years ago. I mean, we used
Right.
to have
Right.
six-figure budgets, and now we have nothing. We have nothing. I mean, I literally mean nothing. And we've got a great team that we put together in the hopes that we could just keep making these movies. But I'm just telling you, at least like the stakes weren't higher, but the money was certainly better. There was more money flowing. See, the problem is when money is one-sided, then the system becomes dysfunctional. You know, behavioral. It becomes highly dysfunctional and psychotic. The real system is money flowing and going out, going back in, going back, and sustaining this sort of equilibrium. Without that, it goes nuts. And we're in that situation because people don't they feel let down by the government. They don't have jobs, at least the jobs they want. If they do have jobs that they want, they're not getting paid or getting paid nearly enough. They don't want to take the jobs that are available, or are they qualified for that? It's just, and they're not putting money into entertainment when you can post yourself on TikTok and in 10 seconds get some gratification, and they like that. And that's why anything that has longevity, like obituaries or deaths, like Robert Redford, it just goes, it's here and it's gone. There's no remembrance of that. So that's what's happening. But going back to, like, let's say the 90s and the 80s, the way traditional distribution was working from, like, let's say the like 85 to like 2000, Like we would go to a festival like Sundance or Cannes, we would see a movie and say, okay, this is a pretty good movie. And then by that time, there weren't that many players because you had to have a reasonable amount of money to be able to do theatrical, which cost a lot of money. Each print was $2,000. You had to ship it. If you had to four-wall a cinema, it was 5,000 a screen. It's very expensive. Just a little ad like this in the New York Times will run you 3 grand. I don't know if it runs these days. I remember running like this in the LA Times. It was like $2,000, and the filmmaker was like, "Why is it so small?" I said, "Dude, that's $2,000, and you're in one theater." So,
Right.
but so what would happen was that they'd see a movie I would like, and then I would call my friend at a major cable network, who I won't name, and he would say, "Okay, yes, I like that one too. We've also tracked it. So if you acquire it and you put it into 10 cities or theatrically, we'll pay you this much money." And it was a case by case scenario for that. So, and a lot of times they would say, "No, no, no, I don't want it." The worst case scenario was me buying a movie, buying the rights, and then nobody wanting it. It was like, and it was tough because, like, we were being ridiculed because we were paying, like $10,000, $20,000 for the rights to a film, which is a lot now, by the way. That's a lot. But at that time, they were. I would get these very snarky comments because they got abused. They got spoiled by the Miramax game, the huge 6 figures, 7 figures. But I get these snarky remarks like $10,000 does not a deal make. But my point is that so X person, my friend at the cable company would say, okay, well, I'll pay you $35,000. And then I would go to like a videotape or DVD company and say, well, did you see this movie? What do you think? Because at that time there was a hierarchy. There would be the main distributor, which would be me, and I would do the theatrical. And then the DVD would be handled by somebody else because it was a very different business that I wasn't involved and I didn't nor did I know. And then there'd be the cable business, you know, ancillaries. And then there'd be airlines, but never got into airlines as well. Um, so cable would say, okay, we pay like 35,000, 40,000, something like that. DVD or VHS company would say we pay 20. So I knew I had like 60,000 going in. So let's say if I paid the filmmaker 10 or 20,000, they'd leave like 40 left over. Maybe I spend like 25,000, 30,000 on a theatrical. I still have enough to work with. It was really, really tight. And if one thing didn't work off, like if, there were acts of force majeure, like a storm would happen. So our New York premiere would just be slashed away. There'd be no York, we'd spend wasn't a lot, but we still spent like $7,000 or $8,000 at a New York premiere. It's a lot. I think so. So everything was highly speculative, but you don't even have that now because like you're at the whim of whatever the programming at the platforms are like, and we don't. Nobody's really excavated what the algorithms are because they keep changing. Um, and some of it is political, I want to say, but a lot of it is does it fit the game plan of the advertisers? And right now, you know, they're just struggling they're just struggling for any ad dollars that they can get. Um, yeah, so now it's all speculative, and that's why with the death of the traditional distributor, because I'm pretty much I think that they're mostly dead now. When you do have film of an indie rights, which is distribution. That's another episode later on because everyone's covering that better than I can. But everything's highly speculative now, and you're at the whim of, well, first of all, there's only really like 5 platforms that make any difference, 5 or 6 that, your Tubi's, your Amazon Primes. There's only 5 of them that make any difference. It's not like the days of DVD where you say, like, okay, I know we bombed out on Blockbuster, they didn't take it. I know we bombed on Hollywood Video, they didn't take it. But the Virgin Megastore is going to buy $10,000 worth of DVDs, and if it sells, they'll buy $10,000 more. Or Tower Records will say, okay, we're going to do big promotion because we love Norman Reed or we love this movie. So we're going to buy $20,000 worth of DVDs. Now we can't guarantee we're going to sell it, but maybe we sell 10 with a promotion, you can profit. So there are all these different pockets. The Barnes and Noble was great for collegiates. Now there's no way to identify it because you got places like Hoopla, but, that's not a mainstream service in my way, but whereas, you knew Barnes& and Noble, boom, this is the kind of movie you want to sell there for DVD. You knew Hollywood Video, boom. You knew Blockbuster, boom. You knew Virgin. You were gonna get this kick-ass, collection of movies. But now all you've got are these one platforms trying to make sense of its own identity, and it's just latching on to whatever is predictive. And the problem is it doesn't even know what's predictive, and because so much of what our views are shaped on, we don't even know. Like we're subconsciously being led into these paths that are predicting what we think we'll like, and then the algorithm is setting it up, saying, okay, it likes this, then let's do this, and this, and let's push them. But why are there certain things pushed over others at certain times of the year, and when there's a different regime of executives in place? You know, um, what version of their software are they testing now? And why is it suppressing things so much? Is it a keyword? Which a lot of the times it's a keyword. It's an actor. You never even thought that just putting an actor in your description or your cast on IMDb, and once that feed comes through, certain actors are off limits. They're instant red flags for the algorithms. So it's just pure nuts. But like I said, you can go shoot something right now and you'll make a buck tomorrow if you want to. You make 10 bucks if you want, if you get enough fans. It's just just the art of filmmaking is gone. Y- I mean, years ago I'd asked an exec. I said we're gonna do like this Elvira type of show, and we're gonna have this personality, and she's gonna host like Roofer Madness, and she's gonna host Bride of the Monster. And the executive, this is from a large conglomerate. He said, "Who's Elvira?" And then I knew it was like I knew that the frame of reference was kind of just just over. So you can't teach it anything. Recently, we had a film, and it's so cliched where people do they do the scratches on the film technique, and that got flagged because it said it's not supposed to be there. So see, so a computer can't acknowledge what that's the problem, is that the computer can't acknowledge what's aesthetic, what's artistic. Um, but it's so strong in predicting movements and buying patterns and advertising dollars that that's why it's being used. But it's really silencing a lot of filmmakers, I think. I feel that my work's really sanitized over the years, and even the older films that I did in the 2000s, I've had to sanitize those because I want to get them out. And I tried to explain this to people like 4 years ago. Nobody would listen to me. I said, we're TV content creators. I said, so just face it, accept it, and be happy that people are going to watch your stuff, and then go within that realm and then try to be as creative as you can. And that's how it works, because out of repression is when you're getting these very symbolic movies like Z, um, some of the Fellini stuff, certainly the Tarkovsky stuff. You're seeing that come out of suppression of filmmakers' voices, and I hope some of that comes out too. Um, it's just hard to navigate because how do we all need to eat, and survivalhood's incredibly expensive, you know, right now.
Right. Yeah.
Um, yeah. So on that note, oh, was that what I was saying? Yeah, yeah. What I was saying, like on the film that we had, somebody was adding the scratch. Well, I think we talked about. Yeah, 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 yeah. We talked about. Yeah. So, um, yeah. So I don't know what you want to close, and I was trying to think of something positive to think. I mean, just the fact that we're still like, that we can still have a form of expression. I like the fact that YouTube is, there's always the worry, but you accept the outcome that YouTube will be too big for itself, and now they want us to do. You keep seeing this word called global or globalization, and um, I, you know, I hear it more and more and more, not only in context of movies, but in context of the way the world is operating, like financials and corporations and medical. This sort of globalization, and that's what YouTube's becoming. So what is going to be the global filmmaker's voice? because it's a voice that has to play out to that outreach, and that's why they want stuff that can play out to India. So no kissing, no sex, no LGBT, because that's no good in Russia. Um, you know, plots to overthrow the government is not allowed in certain countries, Middle East, that kind of thing. Certainly China. Well, but YouTube's not in China, so so that's, you know, what is that voice going to be, and how many are willing to play along? Like my feeling is like, you know, I always have to have my finger on a camera. I always have to be on a button or something. Like I don't care what it is, and I'll find my own way to express myself. You know, if it means no nudity, I'll just do it then. If it's no cursing, fine. I'll still be able to express myself.
You're right.
And I think a lot of people will too, but I don't think there's enough of education. Like I haven't seen the numbers for film schools if they drop. My guess is that they've dropped because it's become a useless degree, and it doesn't lead to anything in the professional workforce. But I'm not isolating the cinema industry. There's a lot of other fields that have worthless degrees. You know, social sciences, for example. But I love social. Um, so I haven't figured out what the demographics are for that, but it just seems like of those people who are doing DIY, because the majority of people on our level are doing DIY filmmaking, there's just not enough education on how to navigate the process, because everyone's, not only are you having to create, now you're being thrown into the trenches, so you got to figure out how to fight the rats and how to dodge the bullets, climb over the barbed wire. And I don't know, and there's never going to be one source that says this is how it is, this is what it is. But a lot of the information I'm hearing is sort of all coming from different angles, and it's not really cohesive. Like you're not part of the same whole arena, all these people talking this way, and it's coming from different biases, personal biases and viewpoints. And I'm not saying mine is empirical either. A lot of what I see and how I observe the industry and its mechanics, it's led me to make major choices in my life, namely that I've had to be much more of a filmmaker than a distributor now, because I just don't see that I just don't see that. Well, I guess the question is, I didn't want to be in charge of someone's livelihood, especially somebody who didn't, who hasn't been in the industry and is trying to learn for the first time the nuts and bolts. But yet I see all these people getting lost in a zoo, a sea tide of stuff, whirlpool. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe, maybe some help will come out of what I say. I don't know. I wasn't planning on talking about this today. I don't even know how did we get to this subject, by the way. We're talking about 3-hour tapes, Dances with Wolves. Let's wrap on that. I'm gonna put in the second tape for The Godfather 2 right now. You have a good weekend. I talk to you later.
Talk to you
Ciao.
later.
Ciao,
Ciao.
everybody. Keep it
Bye.
warm.